I used to live in a neighbourhood that was a plantation. I never experienced anything until living there. I was driving home from work. It was 9 p.m. I saw an old lady standing near my house. She was wearing a long white gown. It looked super old. Her hair was long and white, down past her knees. I couldn't see her face. It was like there was a shadow over her face. I parked my car and got out. I said hello and was walking away. She was saying things, but it sounded like gibberish, and I started to walk with baby steps, like she was very fragile. I got to my door and said, "Are you okay?" She turned slowly towards me, looking at me, speaking gibberish. She went from walking very slowly to sprinting towards me, looking at me. What freaked me out was that when she was sprinting, it looked like she was running on air and not on ground. I screamed and went inside, locked my door, and called 911. They came and went searching for her, but they said they never found her, nor had any reports of a woman missing or doing anything. When they left, I saw her from my window walking away like baby steps, with her head down. I didn't sleep good that night. The next day, my dad was in the garage and said to have saw the same woman, but not her face. He ignored her and went into the backyard. And then he heard my 2-year-old nephew screaming because this old lady was laughing frantically at him. When my dad turned around, no one was there. We never talked about it, until a year ago when I brought it up with my mom. She looked shocked. She told me there were 2 times in the 80s where a woman like that suddenly appeared in front of her in public, telling her if she needs to tell anyone she can see her, a bad omen will happen, then disappeared when my mom blinked. I don't know if this is the exact same lady, but that was shit scary. I'm looking for some sort of explanation or feedback for this, because me and my girlfriend are both thoroughly freaked out, and she's adamant about what she saw, and I am as well. I've never seen her this scared before, and we've been together for 2 years now. Some history of the area before I get into the story, so it will maybe make more sense. In the early 60s to the late 80s in the area that I live in, a small town in southern Illinois, there was a local group of Christian conservatives that was very much a cult. A large mansion replicating Mount Vernon, as in George Washington's estate, was built in the centre of the property with cabins in the surrounding areas and an airstrip also on the property. Nowadays, the mansion and everything else is full of old junk and has been long forgotten, and the man who built and was head over everyone is gone as well. If you want more info on the mansion and the history of the property, I can link it in the comments, but for now, I'm just going to get into what happened. So my girlfriend and I have explored the property a handful of times, and I have with another close friend as well. This will matter later. Today it was a nice breezy day and we decided we were going to go exploring this evening, so we hit a couple spots and saved the mansion for last. When we arrived, we go through the mansion and had some of the property as usual, but we decided to head towards an area that is much more difficult to reach on the property that we have never experienced before. Me and my close friend have been towards this area, but we didn't go any further because he didn't want to and obviously was unsettled, but he wouldn't tell me why. We got as close as I did with my friend, and I point out a clearing in some trees that has a fairly dry rock creek bed that we could cut through. The only thing that I noticed that seemed off was that the water appeared very, very dark and cold for how sunny it was outside. This occurred around 6 or 7 p.m. on a sunny evening in Illinois. It's still practically daylight outside. My girlfriend stares at this creek bed for a while and begins acting uneasy and quite afraid, telling me that we need to leave. I shrug it off and tell her we can just keep walking to where we plan to go, and that she's just being paranoid and jumpy. She's still visibly shaken as we keep walking, insisting that we need to leave and that we shouldn't be there. As we are walking, we hear things from the area on the property we were heading towards banging and crashing. We beat feet back to my truck, and she tells me she saw a large gathering of men in blue forms gathered down in the creek looking away from us, as if they were watching something very intently. She said that there was a lot of them and it gave her a very bad feeling watching them, as if there was something we were not supposed to be seeing. Looking through the clearing, I'm not going to lie, I felt uneasy, and she refused to look again on the walk back. Anyone have any idea what could have happened here, or any explanation at all? It was 2008 and I was a freshman in college. My BFF, let's call her Kay, is 1 year younger than me and we're still in high school. Most of Kay's friends were in my grade, so when we all graduated, she was left behind to finish high school pretty much as a loner. One day, I got a random message from Kay that said, "Hey, how's your mom?" I thought this was an odd question considering my mom was a homeless drug addict, and I wasn't exactly in touch with her, and Kay knew this. I asked her why she was asking, and she proceeded to tell me that because she was so lonely and bored, she started playing with a Ouija board, first with a friend and then by herself. The ghost she was talking to claimed to be a teen boy named Caleb. Anyway, she was playing with the board as usual when suddenly it spelled out my entire name, then my mom's entire name. I didn't even know my mom's middle name, but Kay did. Then the board spelled drugs. Kay asked the board if my mom was okay, and the board started going crazy, spelling out mama, mama, and she got really freaked out and stopped playing, then messaged me. I immediately called my mom's dad, who was a reverend and retired pastor, and he prayed over the situation, which made me feel better. Kay stopped playing the Ouija board, and shortly after, a lot of negative things started happening to her. There was a bad car accident in front of the house she had the board at. She was driving and our friend was airlifted, but survived. Kay failed a few classes and didn't get into college. Then she started drinking heavily and became homeless for a few years. She would see images of the devil everywhere. The corner of the room, in dreams, and even in cartoons. She was in a dark place for a while, but things are finally going better for her. I didn't talk to my mom for 10 years. Then a few years ago we reconnected, and she told me about all the times she would try to get better, try and come visit, but something would always go wrong. She told me it felt like something evil had control over her life. She's doing better, and we talk now. 2 years ago, almost to the day, my girlfriend and I were on vacation through New England. We stayed in a beautiful Airbnb in Craftsbury, Vermont for a few nights. The house was quite old. I'm unsure of the date it was built in, but it definitely started with 18 something. We turned in early for our first night there as we'd done quite a bit of driving that day. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee. Being that this place was in the country, and I myself was raised in the country, I often pee outside, particularly on a night like this where the weather is nice and the landscape beautifully illuminated by a nearly full moon. I'm in the backyard doing my business when I notice a woman standing by an outbuilding. Her features are heavily shadowed despite it being such a clear and bright night. What wasn't shadowed was her long white gown billowing in the night breeze. It stood out so much, contrasted against her dark features, that it almost appeared to glow. I rubbed my eyes, half expecting her to be a figment of my imagination, but she was not. She just stood there motionless, other than her gown. I called out to her, "Hello?" I was not met with a response. At this point, I'm absolutely terrified, goosebumps, hair standing up, etc. I once again called out and asked, "Can I help you?" Nothing. After what felt like an eternity of staring at her, waiting for her to speak or move, even vanish into thin air, I retreated back inside and smuggled up next to my girlfriend like a child who had just had a bad dream. I stayed up for hours contemplating what I saw and somehow found sleep eventually. The next day, I opted not to tell my girlfriend what I saw. I know she would not have ridiculed me, but I still felt somewhat embarrassed to speak up. Was it all a dream? I must have convinced myself it was because I never spoke of it for the rest of the trip or for nearly 2 years after the fact. Recently, my girlfriend and I were watching a paranormal TV show. Again, we are not intrigued, not necessarily avid believers. We got on the topic of ghostly encounters, and I finally began telling her about the experience I just described. As I told the story, her expression changed to a look of dread. She interrupted me before I could finish. She had seen her as well. The second night in the house, she had awoken in the middle of the night, feeling like she was being watched. She sat up in bed, and there, standing in the corner of the room, was the same shadow-faced woman in the white gown. She explained she tried to wake me, but admittedly, I had gotten pretty drunk that night, because I knew it was the only way I was going to sleep with the previous night's events on my mind. I murmured incoherently, but never woke despite her best efforts. When she looked up from trying to wake me up, the woman was gone. She, like me, chalked the whole experience up to a dream, until I brought it up recently. 2 years ago, my wife and I moved in with my dad to keep an eye on him, as he's getting old and his health isn't the greatest. As it turns out, the place is haunted. At first we thought it was haunted by the previous owner's wife, but now we're not so sure. The previous owners had lived there for the last 40 to 50 years, and before them, there was nobody on the property. They were the only ones to live in the home before us. The husband passed away about 4 years ago, and his wife passed about 10 or so years ago. Before we moved in, my dad told me how things would disappear all the time. A month or so before moving in, we visited for the evening. We all sat in the living room, talking and watching TV. Dad said he had a 6-pack of beer in the fridge and how I could have one. A few minutes later, I got a beer. It was in bottles, in a 6-pack box. I opened the fridge, pulled a bottle out of the box without so much as touching the box, and shut the door. I went back to my seat and we continued doing our thing. From where I was in the living room, I could see the fridge. My dad could see the whole kitchen and was facing the fridge. Half an hour later, he said he might have one too. So we got up and went to the kitchen to get a beer. While he was in there, he said to me, "You could have put them back in the fridge, they're getting warm." I said, "What?" He repeated himself as he opened the fridge and put the 6-pack of beer, sans 2 bottles, back in. I informed him that I hadn't taken it out of the fridge in the first place. Neither of us had even seen or heard the fridge door open or close, yet the beer was sitting on the counter. After we moved in, we experienced that going on all the time. After 2 years, I've lost over half a dozen DVDs. I can't begin to list everything I've gone to look for, only to have it to be gone. Sometimes I find something a while later in a completely different spot, but most of the time we just never see it again. I had to get my Indiana driver's license, which meant I had to take their test. I took a study book home to read upon what they considered to be traffic laws. It was a couple days later, and I still haven't found it. The other day, my dad was home alone and the TV remote, which he keeps on the table next to his chair, was gone. He searched for over an hour, dissecting the bathroom, kitchen, dining room and living room, but he couldn't find it. Finally, he turned the TV on at the TV and went to make lunch. He turned on the oven and got frozen chicken out the freezer. He opened the bag of chicken and realised he forgot to get the bacon tray out of the oven, so he opened it and the tray was in the oven with the remote sitting on it. Another thing that happened once to me, my wife and I laid down in bed one night. Our dog jumped on it like she does, and I felt her flop down. When she did, I felt her lay up against my shins, which she also does. My wife told her to move, and I felt her move away from my legs. My wife told her to move again, and I said she did. My wife said she didn't move, and said she had been laying right in between us the whole time. I felt, and she was, nowhere near my shins. What had sat down and leaned up against me? No idea, but I had a hard time sleeping that night. My wife informed me that she feels something sitting down on our bed all the time. Other things that go on here include lights going off and on by themselves, the front door locking itself and me out 5 times, the TV turned on once by itself after I'd turned it off and set the remote down, and we were talking in here all the time. My wife and I sit in our room a lot, and usually I hear my name called from the hallway, and it sounds like my dad. In the beginning, I would respond or go out to talk, only to discover that he hadn't called me, or he was asleep, or he wasn't there at all. Plus, we leave our door cracked open so our cat can come and go happily. From where I sit, I can see the hall and I can easily see when he's in it. My wife has heard her name too as if he called, but not nearly as much as I hear mine. And when we hear our names called, the other of us doesn't hear it. The other day, I clearly heard my wife yell my name, which my dad didn't hear while sitting right next to me. She said she hadn't, while also having not heard it. And one day my dad, while home alone, heard someone yelling out to the living room from our bedroom, "Who's there?" And he didn't recognise the voice. He checked, and nobody was there. Well, we always thought it was the lady who lived here before. Now, we're not so sure. All 3 of us have seen a black, cloudy mist the size of a person float through here. I've seen it once or twice, my wife has seen it a few times, and Dad has seen it a dozen or more. One time during the day when it was really sunny out and the inside of our place was all lit up, Dad saw it come down the bathroom. Moved down the hall into our bedroom, and he said the bedroom went dark as if it were night out. My wife once woke me up and saw it above her and then disappeared up into the ceiling. The property we live on is 62 acres and used to be a play lake and campground. Over the years, many people came through and it was loved by everyone. The owner retired and closed the lake like 10 years or so ago. My dad, who has known the owner since he was a child, lived in a camper a few years before moving into the trailer and where we all live now. While we lived in the camper, Dad would often go sit outside at a picnic table and read. Right next to him was an old metal fishing shelter, and behind him was the gravel parking lot. One night he was shocked when a man walked toward the shelter and said hi to him. Dad said hi back, and the man asked some questions, mostly about the old people who owned the place. Dad said they went home if they would like to go up and talk to them, but he said no, he had to be somewhere and walked back around the shelter. My dad said he never heard a car come or go, so he wasn't sure where the guy came from or went to. We're in the country and there's nothing around us. If he had come from a neighbour's house and walked, it would have been very dark, especially if he came from the way he seemed to. It's all woods that way. My dad mentioned the man to the owners, who had incredible memories and knew everyone who ever came there to fish. They had no idea who he was. Months later, the man returned, the same way and at night. They spoke again, only this time when the man left, the same way as he had last time, my dad followed. When Dad got around the shelter, he saw nobody. After the lake closed, Dad wasn't the only one renting a camper from the owner, and all three of the renters, Dad included, would regularly hear cars running right next to their campers, or car doors shutting, yet no cars would ever be seen. That still goes on. Me or Dad are regularly going out at night to see if people are trespassing. Many have seen UFOs out there, and in all areas around there. A few times I was outside at night and heard breathing, growling, or footsteps that all sounded like an animal, particularly a dog of some kind. But when I went to check it out, I'd find nothing. Once I heard a cow moo, and another time I heard what I could only figure out was a goose. Though I'm really not sure what I've heard the sound before. And they both sound as if they came from the field in front of our place. Maybe a goose had been there, but it was highly more unlikely a cow was. One day I was outside and heard our cat meowing in front of our room inside. His litter box is in there, and when I take the dog out, the cat has separation anxiety from the dog. Cute, right? And we'll go into that room, climb up on my wife's desk, and look out the window at me. On this particular day, I heard him meowing and thought nothing of it, until I heard 4 or 5 very heavy footsteps walking rapidly into that room. Honestly, it didn't even sound like our floor making that noise. It sounded heavier, deeper. When the footsteps stopped, I heard my cat meow like I had never heard him meow before or since. I can't explain the sound, but honestly, it sounded like he was responding to whatever had gone in there without him. A moment later, I heard what sounded like my cat tearing out the room, and then I heard him meowing like he normally does, but from the front door. Back in the 70s, while my mom and aunt were dealing with my aunt's ex-boyfriend, my dad was dealing with something else entirely. He met a woman who told him about a friend of hers who had parties at her house all the time in Raymond. So we went. The friend, Chris, had lost her abusive husband when he passed, from what my dad doesn't know. Since he had never let her out of the house or have friends, when he died, she decided to start having parties and everyone was welcome. She would always cook large meals, feed everyone, and then they'd drink, smoke pot, listen to music and party. His son Earl came home from the service, I think the Navy, and he brought home a bunch of drugs that he'd stashed while serving. Earl was a big guy, 6'6", 300 pounds, he had a lisp when he spoke and had sinus problems. The coke probably didn't help with that. One night everyone partied and someone passed out, my dad included. Most were in the living room. Dad woke up and saw the living room full of smoke and thought the house was on fire. Before he could do anything, the smoke was gone, and he noticed the sheet that was hung up in the doorway to the hallway was laying up on the ceiling, and Earl was just beyond it in the living room with his arms up, his hands touching the ceiling. Dad looked down and saw his feet were off the floor. He had blood all over his face. Dad said several others were staring at Earl and freaking out, and Earl fell to the floor while the sheet fell back to its hanging position in the doorway. Earl told him that he had gone and passed out in the bed his dad had died in. He was awakened, heard a voice that sounded like his dad say, "There will be no more drugs in my house." And then he was hit hard in the nose, which shattered it. He also said he had floated all the way down the hall to the living room. Some people rushed to him to hospital. Later, the doctor told them that if he'd been hit any harder, his nose would have been pushed into his brain and killed him. My dad hung around with Earl's younger brother and searched the house for someone who might have come in and done that, but all they found was a metal bar laying on the floor next to the bed. I don't think Earl stopped doing drugs, I'm not sure, but the incident actually fixed his sinus problems and his lisp. Many things happened in and around the house, spiritually and otherworldly. The house was an old country house and had no indoor bathroom. There was an outhouse back behind the house. Dad said at night while partying, the guys would just go out on the side of the house to pee, while the women would squat or whatever. One night, Chris went out to use the bathroom and came back in, hysterical. She said she made it halfway to the outhouse when a bright light lit up everything around her from above, and she began floating up in the air. She grabbed a hold of the clothesline and said if it hadn't been for that, she wasn't sure where she'd be. It continued pulling her upward for a minute and then gave up. The light disappeared and she fell to the ground. Another night, some drunk guy talked my drunk dad into taking a drive to a cemetery. For whatever dumb drunken reason, they decided to steal a bunch of tiny flags that had been placed on vets' graves. They came across a broken headstone that was laying in the grass and picked it up with the intent to set it back upon the piece that it broke off from. But when they got it picked up, the guy said to my dad that they should take it, so they did. When they got it back to Chris's house, they leaned it up against the side of the garage and forgot about it. Later, Chris went outside to use the bathroom. It was storming out. A flash of lightning lit everything up and Chris screamed, then ran back into the house. She said when it flashed, she saw a man standing out there looking at her. She said his face was all scarred up. The guys ran outside looking for him but found nobody. A while later, Dad went out to pee along the side of the house. He saw a shadow on the side of the house come up next to his and he said hi, but got no response. So we looked around and saw the man standing there, scars on his face. They returned the headstone and the guy never came back. They went down the road after that to a local pizza place bar and found a guy there they knew and told him about it. He turned white, then told them about a guy who had left the bar, drove up the road and crashed his car right in front of that cemetery and burned to death in his car. It was that guy. Many years ago, a friend of mine and I started our own ghost hunting group. She lives way down in Kentucky and I live in Cincinnati, so we never got together on a hunt. She always hunted places around her and I hunted near me. We combined all of our pics and recordings on a website that I ran, and after a year or so, gave up on the group, though we still hunt. Except for Waverley. We got together there for a full night of hunting and was joined by a friend, or relative, I'm not sure, who she hunted with all the time. We made a group of around 10 people and I think 3 guides. We were given a tour and then were allowed to hunt each floor one at a time for the rest of the night. For those who don't know, Waverly Hills Sanatorium was built in Louisville, Kentucky years ago as a tuberculosis hospital. Over 60,000 people died here over the years, and now it is widely regarded as one of the top 10 haunts in America. We couldn't go to the first floor that night because it was done up for Halloween, so we started on the second floor. After hunting it for a while, we all agreed to step out for a 15-minute smoke break and head back in. My friend left her voice recorder inside, recording the whole time. When we went back in, she checked it and picked up what sounded like people shuffling by, wheezing. We were also told of Tommy, the little boy who had a rubber-bound ball he played with. After succumbing to TB, people reported seeing his ball roll down the hills, never to be found. On his floor, we ended up at one end of the hospital by ourselves and decided to see if we could talk with him. My friend was using her voice recorder and I was filming on my camcorder. She asked, "Timmy, do you like playing hide and seek?" from out in the hall, and I heard a little boy yell loudly, "No!" Neither my friend or the other guy heard it, which blew me away. My friend listened to her voice recorder and there was nothing on it. Later, when I got to review my recording, my camcorder had picked it up, but it was very faint, and no matter how much I tried to enhance it, I couldn't get it to sound good. That night, we went up to the top floor roof, and while it was in the 60s that night, everyone's digital thermometers kept registering 17 degrees. We also saw shadow people running up and down the halls all night. It was so bad on the floors above us that the tour guides would often run up to those floors to investigate to make sure vandals hadn't broken in, which is a problem for them then. Might still be, probably. I guess I should explain that better. If you don't know the building, the back side of it has giant windowless openings. They believed fresh air would help get rid of the TB. Throughout the night, we would lean up against the sills of them and check evidence or whatever. And from those windows, we could look up into the other windows along the wall and see the shadows running around. Then the tour guides would radio other security people and they'd just go off to check. I loved the place and all the activity, but the general feeling in there may keep me away from ever hunting there again. Though I'd love to. In 2008, I had to move and my girlfriend, my wife now, needed a place to live. So 3 months after we started dating, we were moving into a place together. It was a very small, one-bedroom ranch house with a basement in Silverton, Ohio. It was an older house that was designed strangely, had questionable features, and never felt welcoming. After a short time, things started going on there. Luckily nothing too crazy, but here's what went down. The basement was very creepy, and I'm not really creeped out that easily, but when I went down there, I felt as if I was being watched. And if I didn't have to go there to do laundry, I would have never gone. The air also felt a little thick down there all the time. When letting my dogs outside, they would always stop at that door and stare at it. And every now and then there would be a bang from down there and we would hear upstairs what sounded like a trap door being released when someone was hung at the gallows. I never discovered what made that sound. The blind in the only kitchen window was the kind that rolled down and you had to tug on it to get it to roll up, except it never wanted to work for us. If we got it down, we could almost never get it rolled up, though sometimes it would just roll up on its own. I don't necessarily think that was paranormal, but who knows? Lastly, in the living room, the ceiling was like 10 feet up or higher, and there was a light on it that was operated by a pull string. It was a chain at the light and for a couple feet down, but there was a string tied to the chain that hung down further so it could be reached. When you used it to turn the light on or off, it made that familiar sound of the chain rubbing against the side of the hole, and then the click. We heard the chain rubbing all the time with no click, and the light never turned on or off by itself, but we gathered that whatever was pulling the string wasn't strong enough to get it to click. However, we did catch the string swaying after hearing the noise many times. In fact, one day I was sitting on the couch talking to my friend on the phone, and I just happened to look up at the string a second before it was pulled, and I saw it happen. It made the noise, and the string bounced up when it was let go of, and swung around like it always did. We moved after 8 months there, and I was happy to go. Not because of what went on, hauntings don't bother me like that, but because of how I felt in the house. Not really evil, but not good, either. One day, back in 2012-13, I was forced to sleep in the spare room in the back of the house because my sister's boyfriend was staying in my bed for the night. I always hated this end of the house because it's always cold. I mean, if the house was sitting at 30 degrees Celsius, 86 Fahrenheit, that end of the house would be sitting at less than 10 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Really weird. In the corner of the room there was a singular chair. No reason as to why, but aside from the bedside table and curtains, there was no other features to the room, so I always assumed it must have been to add life to the room. On this night, I woke up at a really early hour of the morning. As I sat up and looked around, there was the girl, no older than 12, in school clothes, just sitting in the chair. She wasn't doing anything, didn't have a weird face, nothing creepy about her aside from the fact that she was sitting there. Obviously, I shit myself in the moment, pulled the sheets over my head and enjoyed the rest of the night and never spoke of it to anyone. Roughly 2 days later, I was at my grandparents' house and they showed me this book that was written about our ancestry on his side. Weird flex, I know. As we were going through the book, he introduced me to a photo of his great-grandmother. It was a school photo of the exact same person when she was around 12 years old, wearing the exact same clothes. I did not know this book even existed until that day. I instantly flew out the chair and begged my parents to go home. To this day, there has always been one room in my house that is always freezing in comparison to the others, regardless of the house temperature. Scariest part, my bedroom is that room in my current house. As I finish typing this, a really loud ringing has just started occurring in my ears. Probably just convenient timing, but who knows?